Imagine a team that, while possessing the most explosive offense in the league, finds itself back to square one in 18 months. The Miami Dolphins. In the last 10 years, this franchise has seen it all. False dawns, the fastest offense in the league, freezing playoff nights, and one of the heaviest dead cap bills in history. The sun truly never sets in South Florida. However, their playoff drought has now reached a quarter of a century. In this video, we'll list the 10 moments that most critically changed the Dolphins' last 10 years forever. And I must say, our number one item will likely divide the discussion. Before we begin the countdown, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this channel will continue to feature content you'll love throughout the season. Let's start with number 10. 10. The broken knee. The end of an era. 10 years ago, under Adam Gase, Miami managed to make the playoffs for the first time since 2008, going 10-6. Despite the wild card loss in Pittsburgh, the city was quite hopeful, and there was finally a direction to look forward to. Then, in the 2017 camp, Ryan Tannehill suffered another knee injury, and the season ended before it even began. Panicked management brought back the retired Cutler for $10 million. The result was a 6-10 record, and we can literally talk about a disintegrating locker room. In the short term, what was lost was a season. But what was truly lost was a sense of direction. The Gas era had utterly rotted away, and the Tannehill era had thus come to an end. Miami suddenly found itself at the very bottom of its franchise quarterback search. If that knee injury hadn't happened, perhaps there wouldn't have been a tank. Perhaps there wouldn't have been Tua either. That broken bond had knocked over all the dominoes of the previous decade. 9. The Great Destruction. In 2019, new head coach Brian Flores didn't have a clear roster. Tannehill had been sent to Tennessee, and Tunsil was subsequently traded to Houston in exchange for 2 first-round and 1 second-round pick. Weeks later, Minkah Fitzpatrick went to Pittsburgh for a first-round pick. The American media's nickname for this situation was quite clear: Tank for Tua. The team started the season 0-7. However, Flores' players definitely didn't give up. They managed to win 5 of their last 9 games, even beating the Patriots in the final week of the season. Of course, this came at a heavy price. The number 1 pick, Joe Burrow, went to someone else, and the immediate gain in such a situation was record draft capital. The lasting legacy, however, was the entire roster plan for the next 5 years, and the tanking accusations that would erupt years later. So as you can understand, to be reborn, you first had to be reduced to ashes. 8. The dream that remained at Arrowhead. The truth is, the 2023 Dolphins were a work of art. The 70 points scored against the Broncos were the highest in a single game since 1966. Tua became the first Dolphins quarterback since Dan Marino to lead the league in passing yards. 11 wins. Super Bowl whispers. Then, in January, Miami traveled to Kansas City. The temperature was minus 20 degrees Celsius, the 4th coldest game in NFL history. The team of the sun disappeared in the ice 26-7. That night wasn't just a playoff loss. It was a mirror held up to them. Essentially, this core team produced spectacular statistics. But in the physical battle, in the cold, on the playoff stage, they crumbled. And that loss extended their playoff win drought, which had lasted since 2000, to a quarter of a century. If they had won that night, perhaps the window would have remained open. They lost, and that's when the first crack appeared in the glass. 7. The Flores Earthquake. In January 2022, despite 2 consecutive winning seasons, Brian Flores was fired, leaving the entire league stunned. 3 weeks later, Flores retaliated in a lawsuit against the NFL and the Dolphins. He alleged that team owner Stephen Ross offered him $100,000 for every loss in 2019 and pressured him to engage in illegal contact with Tom Brady. Subsequently, the league launched an investigation. In August, the verdict was announced. The tanking allegation could not be proven, but tampering was established. Ross was fined $1.5 million and suspended. The franchise's 2023 first round and 2024 third round draft picks were forfeited. Of course, the visible part of the bill was reputation and draft capital. The invisible part was the shadow that hung over the club for years. This earthquake paved the way for McDaniel to take over as coach. Yes. But if you're making headlines with your own owner while fighting your rivals, you've already lost the culture war. 6. A $212 million bet. 2 years ago in July 2024, Miami made its decision. A 4-year, $212 million extension for Tua Tagovailoa, despite his history of concussions. The franchise had tied its future to the quarterback's health. In such a situation, the fans were divided. The management said, "He's our guy." Exactly 6 weeks later, again on a Thursday night, again against Buffalo, Tua collided with Damar Hamlin and suffered his third official concussion of his career. In fact, retirement discussions flared up. Without him, the offense collapsed. The team dropped to 2-6 and finished the season 8-9 outside the playoffs. At first glance, it was a wasted season. In reality, however, that signature became the heaviest chain around the franchise's neck. 2 years later, Miami would risk a dead cap burden of approximately $99 million to get rid of that contract. The stakes were enormous. Ultimately, the cost of losing was enormous. 5. Time stood still in Cincinnati. The calendar showed September 29th, 2022. Thursday night football. Tua's presence on the field after stumbling and falling in the Buffalo game 4 days earlier was already a subject of debate. Yes, then the moment came. Tua crashed to the ground, his fingers locked in midair, and all of America watched in horror on live television. He was carried off the field on a stretcher. The players' union fired the independent doctor. The NFL rewrote its concussion protocol. That night became a turning point in the league's player health history. Then, in December, another setback occurred. Tua missed the team's first playoff game since 2016, and Miami lost 34-31 to Buffalo, battling rookie Skylar Thompson. But I can confidently say that the real long-term damage was in people's minds. That night, an indelible question was etched into the franchise's mind. Can Tua be relied upon in the long term? Every major decision that followed was made in the shadow of that question. 4. The Big Reset. The final season in 2025 was perhaps the season where everything was resolved. In Week 4, Tyreek Hill's knee suffered a horrific dislocation and torn ligaments in a game against the Jets. The team then fell behind 2-7 and had to part ways with Chris Greer, their general manager of 9 years. Evan Phillips was traded to Philadelphia at the deadline. Having the worst season of his career, Tua was forced to sit out after 15 interceptions, and rookie Quinn Ewers replaced him. Thus, the season ended 7-10, and Mike McDaniel was fired. Then, of course, came a storm. John Eric Sullivan from Green Bay was appointed general manager, and in February, Hill and Bradley Chubb were released. In March, something nobody could have imagined happened. Miami officially traded Tua for approximately $99 million in dead cap. The key to the offense was given to Malik Washington. Even Jalen Waddle was traded to Denver. Perhaps all the faces of an era were erased in just 18 months. It was as if this franchise had become a completely different franchise. and history was being rewritten right before our eyes. 3. A revolution in speed. 4 years ago, March 2022. Miami knocked on Kansas City's door and put 5 draft picks on the table for the league's fastest man, 1 first round and 1 second round pick. Then came a $120 million contract that made Hill the highest paid wide receiver at the time. Of course, expectations were huge, and Cheetah exceeded them, leading the league in yards with 1,710 in his first season and 1,799 in 2023. Miami suddenly became the league's most fearsome offense. Miami speed became a brand. But let's not forget that the long term was brutal. The massive contracts locked the salary cap, disrupted roster balance, and the story ended with a knee injury in 2025. When Hill was released in February 2026, he left behind legendary statistics, but 0 playoff wins. What happened was that this trade gave Miami an identity. And that same trade also rewrote the expiration date of that identity. 2. The McDaniel effect. I want to talk about a fact. Right in the middle of the Flores earthquake, Miami brought in an extraordinary mind from San Francisco, Mike McDaniel. Some probably saw it as a risky experiment, but he redefined offensive football, motion, speed, creativity. Tua had career seasons. In 2022, they made the playoffs for the first time in 6 years. And in 2023, Miami dominated the league's offensive charts. Of course, it must be acknowledged that in the short term, McDaniel brought the Dolphins back to the league spotlight. But the story ended with a broken ending. 2 playoff spots in 4 seasons, 0 playoff wins, and a team that stumbled again and again in December. Essentially, the era ended with a 2025 collapse. Yet the truth is, he gave this franchise its clearest identity in the last decade. And every answer sought today is compared to the system he built. I can't help but ask, what if that brilliant offense had transformed into a championship character? That's the question that keeps Miami awake at night. 1. The Tua bet. And finally, we've arrived at number 1. We're on draft night 2020, meaning all the destruction, the tank, and all those lost seasons had one target: a franchise quarterback. Miami announced their 5th pick, Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama. The fact that Justin Herbert went to the Chargers in the very next pick officially ignited a debate that would last a decade. Tua had given this franchise everything: record shooting percentages and a magical 2023 season, even a Pro Bowl night. But he also brought about setbacks, never-ending health issues, and fading hopes in December. We may never know the winner of this debate, but one thing we know for sure is that the last 10 years of the Dolphins were officially written with the number 5 pick. And yes, that's how we summarize the last 10 years of the Miami Dolphins. This franchise isn't just about stars and victories, of course. It's built on wrong decisions, some losses, and especially on getting back on its feet every time. Today's identity is practically rising on that wreckage. Sullivan's vision, Ewer's discipline, and Devon Achane's explosiveness. A very young core. But the question on the table remains the same, and it gets a little tougher with each passing year. Can this new era manage to bring that playoff victory that hasn't come since 2000? And I want to leave the floor to you. Is there another item you think is missing from the list? Be sure to write it in the comments. By the way, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Take care until the next video.